Hi there folks, Joel Self, Outdoor Instructor here, and welcome to the second episode of the What's on My Harness series. Last episode we talked about what I carry when I'm climbing and instructing at my local indoor wall, whereas today we're going to be talking about what I take personally when I'm going out to my local sport crag. And remember, this video and all of the videos in this series are about what's on my harness. So we're not going to be talking about clipsticks, helmet, climbing shoes, climbing chalk. That stuff is all separate. The equipment on my harness are things like our Quickdraws, and that's where we're going to start things off today. I'm going to be carrying some of these slightly heavier duty sport draws. These have got some really nice big chunky carabiners on, nice and easy to clip, and we've got a slightly thicker dog bone than our traditional trad draw. If I grab a trad draw for us, these are a little bit longer, and that's to eliminate as much movement as possible on our gear, and they're very thin bits of sling by comparison. The reason for that is to keep them as lightweight as possible, so when we're making ascents to the mountain we're not carrying loads of really heavy gear. There's a bit of a note on that earlier today in the why don't we use rigging plates video. So that's one design of quick draw, normally used with trad. Here is one design for our sport draw. It's quite short and it's got that thicker dog bone, but that's not always the case. We can have much longer slings, but also we can have much thicker slings. So here's a really nice sport draw made by DMM, and I do love these. This has got a nice bent gate, making clipping the rope really straightforward and easy, feels very fluid. It's got a really chunky dog bone to it, and it's super lightweight. It seems strange because it's actually a bit bigger than this one in terms of the size of carabiners and such, but it's lighter weight than this more budget friendly option. I feel like these draws retail at between 16 and 18 pounds if I remember correctly, whereas these were 9 or 10 pounds each. So a few different options there for our draws. We're not going to get too much into what brand I prefer over this or that. I just wanted to show you a few differences there. So I'll be carrying my budget friendly options today, and I'll have 10 on my harness normally for a day of sport climbing at my local crags. The reason for that is that there's going to be routes that require 8, there's going to be routes that require 11, and if me and my friend go out for the day, likelihood is they're going to bring a few draws, I'm going to bring my 10, and that way we're covering all bases. The longer routes we're going to have enough for, and the shorter routes we'll have way more than we need, and we can leave some on the floor. That's no problem at all. When I clip these to my harness, it's worth noting that there's a more flexible carabiner that can move around on the sling more, and there's a rigid carabiner that's more securely anchored to the sling. That can be done in several different ways. In the case of this quick draw, there's a small elastic band on there put on by the manufacturer that stops this from moving around. However, some have got a bigger plastic grommet that covers the whole end of the setup. It's just different designs really, but nonetheless you will have a more rigid end and a more flexible end. That flexible end is to go on the bolt, and so that's the one that I will clip to my harness. It means that when I take this off and go up to the bolt, I don't have to turn the quick draw around, I can just clip straight in nice and smoothly. So that's our quick draws covered. And it's worth noting, I suppose, before we move on, I spread them evenly across my harness. So if I'm doing a route that requires 10 draws, I'll have 5 per side, unless it's very obvious that all of the draws are off to one side and I'm going to be constantly clipping with one hand rather than crossing across my body like that. If you're going to be clipping your draws all on one side, do move them all over in that direction, and maybe just leave 1 or 2 on the other side for that move that maybe has caught you out when you're doing your route reading. Next bit of equipment we'll look at is a belay device. So I opt to carry an assisted braking device, and this is for very similar reasons to in the previous video. I may be belaying someone who's going to be sat there for a long time on the rope whilst they clean holds, work out moves, and just generally look at the line. So having an assisted braking device is going to take a lot of tension off my arms as a belayer, and it's going to stop them from slowly creeping down the wall as rope would be working its way through our stitch plate. they're also really nice and easy to tie off. So that's why I carry an assisted braking device, but you are going to need to carry a belay device of some description. Back on that same gear loop, I'll also be carrying a pair of extra carabiners. Now these are primarily used in our lower offs, and if you don't know how to do a sport climbing lower off, there are a few different safe options. I've done a video on one of them. You can watch that using the link down in the description below. So why do I carry two of these? You can actually get away with just carrying one spare carabiner. They do need to be screw gates for what we'll do with them in a lower off, but I carry two so that if I give one to my mate earlier in the day for them to do a lower off, I don't get caught out later on and find that I'm at the top of a route wanting to lower off and I don't have one of these on my harness anymore. So that's my own preference for carrying two. It also will help with something we're going to come on to a bit later on. So two extra screw gates stored on the back of my harness with my gree-gree. Oh, and by the way, when I'm climbing and I'm on sport, I don't carry my belay device up the route because 9 times out of 10 we're doing a single pitch climb. Obviously if we're going to multi-pitch a sport route, then I'll have to take the belay device with me. Otherwise, I leave that extra weight on the floor. Next bit of equipment is the adjustable lanyard. We talked about this in the previous video. We won't get too much into it, but really, really useful in our lower off situations. It's not got too many other uses in a sport setting. There are a few. We won't get into that now, but it's nice to have this dynamic material when we're using this for our lower offs. A lot of people will use a sling to larkspur onto their belay loop, they'll clip into the lower off chains and they'll do all their faffing there. Now that might be okay and I know is fairly common practice, but static slings are not great as personal lanyards because if we build up slack in those slings and then sort of drop onto them, we can shock load the sling, shock load what they're attached to and cause damage to that equipment or ourselves. Ultimately, you could end up breaking the sling if you're applying a huge amount of force to it. So I opt to carry a personal lanyard. I managed to pick this one up very cheaply. I think it was about £20, and it's made of dynamic rope. It can be adjusted longer or shorter within a matter of seconds. It's really, really great for me and the way I think in my own climbing. So if you're looking for something similar, there's a couple of different companies who make them. They're just brilliant devices. But this will get stored underneath all my Quickdraws, and I clip it to one of my further back gear loops, normally the second one when I'm sport climbing. The reason for that is when I grab my drawers, they're not tangled up underneath it and I can get them nice and quickly. We're only really going to be using our lanyard when we get to the lower off anyway, so there's no point having it on top of all the other kit that we're going to be using to get there. So that's the equipment I carry on my harness when I'm doing my normal everyday sport climbing. But there are a few extra pieces that I might take with me as well. So here I've got a pair of HMS carabiners. They're the same design and model, and they're on a 120 sling. The reason for that is so that I can build myself some bottom rope setups so that me and my friend can work the climbing route without wearing the fixed protection at the top of the route. So you could, of course, thread your lower off, go down, and then your mate says, oh, I'd like to try that, but I don't fancy leading it. And yes, they may end up top roping it through the lower off chains. But if we are planning on going out and doing a day of working on routes, it's best practice if we can avoid excessive wear on the fixed protection. So using those two carabiners that we're carrying anyway, we're just going to clip our sling into the two bolts at the top. And we've covered sling anchors in another video. If you want to watch that, there'll be a link down in the description. But very quickly, I'm just going to build myself a sling anchor here between the two bolts. And when I'm setting up a bottom rope, I'll use my two HMS carabiners in opposing directions. Gravity load them. Make sure the gates get done up once the rope's in there. And I can leave the rope running through this, and I can now go to the ground and me and my friend can bottom rope on this climb until our heart's content. Then we can come up and we can do our ordinary lower off setup. So this is why I carry these extra few bits. Worth noting though, we use 2 carabiners on here, because if we're using this setup and it's rattling against the rock, which in some cases is going to be unavoidable, we don't want to end up in a position where the gate could get worked undone by tapping against the rock or getting moved around, etc. And maybe if we're taking out our family to climb, you might have some young children who maybe when they get to the top would start fiddling with things like this. So we want to avoid that if we can, and having 2 carabiners on there just safeguards us against some of the issues that could arise from an open gate. So those extra bits will be on my harness if I know we're going out for a day of working on hard climbs. The other piece of equipment that I'll carry once in a blue moon, and this tends to be more on the days when we're going out in a bit of a group, I might take a hand ascender. Again, lots of companies make this one. This just happens to be made by Petzl. And this simple hand ascender is brilliant for getting myself up a fixed line. So if I maybe need to get across to an adjacent route and clip the drawers in ready for the lead, I can do that. Or if I just want to quickly razz up a line and take that cool top-down shot of my friend who's climbing up an impressive lead, then it facilitates me doing that. I have done a video on ascending and descending single lines. Again, link in description. The description's just going to be link after link. But when I did that video, we talked about using devices such as the rig or the ID industrial descender. The reason for that was that video is orientated around those who are thinking of going out and spending a day intentionally ascending and descending fixed lines. What we're talking about here is improvising a quick setup using my ascender and my gree for that one shot, that one photograph that we quickly realise, oh, wish I had brought the other kit, I'd better run up with what I've got and take that photograph. You know, we don't carry our industrial equipment all the time. It's heavy duty stuff, it's a lot of weight to lug around. So really, if I can just stick an extra hand ascender in the climbing pack, that's not going to add too much weight. But as soon as I start adding IDs and other lanyard bits and all sorts of other kit, you know, it's going to start weighing a lot really fast. So that's just there for those improvised ascents and descents that I may make out on a day of sport climbing with my friends. So there's all the various different bits of kit. What's on my harness is my main gear, and then obviously we've got some additional stuff here that I might carry in particular situations if that arises. I hope that video has been helpful for you. Sorry it's a slightly longer one, but for now that's all we've got. I've been Joseph Outdoor Instructor. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.